Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is 2005's Resident Evil 4, the revolutionary horror action title that departed from the series' pre-rendered backgrounds for a mission to save the president's daughter in rural Spain.
Following that is the 3D platformer Collectathon, featuring a bear and a bird that took Super Mario 64's foundations to the next level, 1998's Banjo-Kazooie. Joe, we've been stuck with that shot number 2 of the COVID-19 vaccine, but you got it yesterday, and I got it today.
Which means today is my turn for side effects, and I truly hope that they don't hit you as hard tomorrow.
Oh, I know I'm pounding Pedialyte, that's for sure. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I've been downing water like crazy. I took some Dayquil before we started recording. We'll see if it does anything.
But it should be a good episode this week. I mean, these 2 games, ones we are finally getting to, like it should not have taken 119 episodes to get here, but they're both games that have famous shifts in their project focus during development. Notable stories that people who follow games are familiar with, and if you don't know them, it's going to be fun to learn about.
It's always really interesting when you have these games that essentially started as something completely different, and you get the story behind like why they were going to be like that and why they changed. It's just really interesting, and yeah, I agree. I think this is going to be a good episode.
Definitely. But Joe, side effects from the vaccine aside, how you doing? What are you playing?
I'm doing overall fine. Basically, the only game I played over the past week was Resident Evil 4.
Oh.
Burned through it in about 2-3 days. So I was desperately trying to finish it before we did this episode, and also it's one of my resolutions. I wanted to play it. I'll talk more about it in a bit, but it was interesting, to say the least.
Well, that's good and timely that you got to do that. I haven't had much time for games this week, but I did get to try MLB 21 The Show on Xbox Game Pass, and that was pretty fun. It's been many years since I've played a baseball game, so it's been interesting to see how it's progressed overall.
The only thing I know about that is it was a Sony exclusive, and it's apparently a big deal that it's on other stuff now.
Yeah, Major League Baseball wanted more money, so they kind of pushed Sony San Diego Studio, the developer, and PlayStation as a whole to be like, hey, license it out to more platforms. And so they're like, okay.
Or else.
And then Microsoft's like, we're coming in with that Game Pass energy swinging around between our legs. And it's like, okay, it's a way to open and expand that audience. I get it. But baseball aside, let's talk about some composer follow-up news, headlines based on the past week in the game industry that tie into the composers that we've talked about on the show before. Let's start with the DICE Awards. This is a little older than a week, but it's one of those things where it happened just after we recorded, and I will get to it the next time. So yes, the DICE Awards happened from the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences. And generally, with most award shows that we've been covering on the show, we like to highlight 2 categories, one of which is the music composition, the other game of the year. So for Outstanding Achievement in Original Music Composition, a category that did not have Final Fantasy VII Remake this year, similar to the BAFTAs for whatever reason, Ghost of Tsushima won that category, which was a pretty good pull for them. I don't think it really won any of the other big awards in that category this year.
Yeah, when I see Tsushima winning stuff, it's usually for something to do with its sound and music. I really got to get to it, because apparently it's fantastic soundtrack.
Also, it's art design. It's a gorgeous game with a lot of color. But then, Hades won 5 awards, including Game of the Year. Another award show where it cleaned up.
Yeah, as they all should be. Speaking of Hades, perfect segue into the next one. Darren Korb and Ashley Barrett actually recorded some new music for a graphic novel series. It's called Rickety Stitch, and it's about a bard who also happens to be a skeleton bard. I know basically nothing about this, but it popped up on Twitter. Darren was tweeting about it and all that, so I'm looking forward to looking into it a little bit more.
Yeah, it does sound interesting. We've mentioned before how Austin Wintory has a podcast called Game Maker's Notebook, and he talks to different people in the game industry, sometimes other composers as well. And so on his most recent episode, he had a chat with Jesper Kyd. And so if you'd like to hear two composers who we've covered on the show before talk about life in the industry, well, that's your place to do it.
But after you've listened to this one. Don't leave here to go listen to...
Please, we beg you.
And unfortunately, the last follow-up news story that we have to bring to the table today is not a happy one. In episode 77, I brought Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus to the table, and the composer behind that game was a man by the name of Ashif Hakik. And unfortunately, the news came out a couple of days ago at time of recording that he has unfortunately passed away. We do not have any details as to why. We don't really need any details as to why. It's not really any of our business, but rest in peace. He did music not only for Sly Cooper, but he did music for Crash Nitro Kart, which apparently is like a big favorite among some PlayStation fans. He did music for the North American version of Fantavision, and it was good. He was pretty good at his job, and by all accounts, from what I've seen, was a very, very nice and supportive individual within the industry. So rest in peace, Mr. Hakik. I am also sending good vibes out to the family and friends of him.
Definitely. I mean, also some people may know the Tomba or Tombi franchise. I mean, working on that for you, Sly Cooper is a huge part of your life. And, for me, not as much, but, music that I really identified and really enjoyed when I played that series for the first time. So, shocking news to be sure. And, we've talked about on the show when Normand Corbeil had already passed away years before we covered him, but this is a first, and that's tough news to hear. And yeah, all the thoughts and prayers to his friends and family.
Yeah, the unfortunate part is I don't think either of us were ready with a plan for in case something like this happened, because, I mean, you never really expect something like this to happen. So.
No. But we figured it was worth to bring up on the show, let you know in case you wanted to send your well wishes as well.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, let's bring the tone up just a little bit. Not a lot, though, because it's a horror game, so it can't go super high. But it can at least go higher than that, because we're going to talk about Resident Evil 4. So, Resident Evil 4 was originally released on the Nintendo GameCube on January 11th, 2005 in North America, January 27th in Japan, and then March 18th in the PAL regions. In Japan, much like the rest of the series, it is titled Biohazard 4. Normally, this is the point in the show where I would tell you about all the other versions and when they came out, except Resident Evil 4 is one of the most ported games in the history of the industry. Like, I'm pretty sure the only game that really beats it out is probably Doom. So after the GameCube, it saw ports for PlayStation 2, PC, Wii, iOS, Zeebo, which I guess is a Brazilian service, PS3, Xbox 360, Android, PS4, Xbox One, and then most recently in 2019, it saw a release on the Switch. So it's been on essentially everything from the PlayStation 2 and GameCube on, except for the original Xbox. It's like the only blind spot. So we have talked about one game in the Resident Evil series up to this point, being RE7 back in October, which was episode 91. That was the Halloween episode, I'm pretty sure. As you might guess, it's the fourth main series game in the Resident Evil franchise, but because I just find it funny, if you count all the spin-offs, this is the 13th Resident Evil game to ever come out.
Oh my gosh.
For reference, I believe we are now at like 24, Village is going to be like 24 or so. Resident Evil 4 is a survival horror third-person shooter where the player controls ex-Raccoon City police officer and one of the original protagonists from Resident Evil 2, Leon Kennedy. And it's very notable for dropping the traditional Resident Evil staples of pre-rendered backgrounds and a set camera angle in favor of an over-the-shoulder perspective, which lent itself much better to more action-y gameplay. It is considered to be the game that actually popularized the style of putting the camera over the character's shoulder in a third-person shooter, and this would go on to influence a ton of games, like most notably, just off the top of my head, Dead Space and Gears of War both grabbed that and claimed Resident Evil 4 as an inspiration for that, and I'll get into more later, but it was a very big deal. So the story of Resident Evil 4 is pretty simple. 6 years after the horrific viral outbreak in Raccoon City, Leon Kennedy is now an agent of the United States assigned with protecting the president's family. So Secret Service, basically. When the president's daughter Ashley Graham is kidnapped by a mysterious cult in the Spanish countryside known as Los Iluminados, Leon is sent to the area to rescue her. When he arrives, he finds that the locals are all incredibly hostile, having been put under the control of a parasite known as Las Plagas, which has caused them to come under the control of the cult's leader, Osmond Sadler. Initially armed with only a handgun and a knife, Leon must fight his way through the villagers and Sadler's near infinite supply of horribly mutated monsters, and the stakes get even higher when both Leon and Ashley are injected with Las Plagas themselves. The clock starts ticking before they become the mindless zombies as well. Can Leon rescue Ashley from Sadler's clutches and foil his plan? Just what are the Las Plagas, and could the remnants of a malicious third party be attempting to retrieve them as well? And just what is Sadler planning to do with an infected Ashley and Leon? Peter, this is where I will ask you, what are your experiences with Resident Evil 4?
I have an unpopular opinion about this game, I think. I don't get along too well with it. I tried playing it for the first time on the PS3 version, which I know some people say, like, the Wii's the best because you have the pointer control and that really helps with the aiming, and I can get that for sure.
But good luck finding that version.
Well, you know, means.
Yeah.
But I appreciate what it did for third-person shooters because I've played, I feel like, so many third-person shooters that have that over-the-shoulder perspective. But the Resident Evil games that I've appreciated and got along with are more the mansion inspection, the room inspection, the Resident Evil 2 remake, which, yeah, game with Leon Kennedy and has that over-the-shoulder perspective. Even, you know, Resident Evil 7 in a way. I like that gameplay flow. Didn't necessarily find that same thing in RE4, and I think there's also, if I remember correctly, a stiffness in when you're aiming, like you can't move that much. That also has been improved upon in third-person shooter games since then. So I appreciate what it did for the industry, but RE4 and I have not gotten along so well in the time I tried to play it.
So the unfortunate part is that sort of feeling and dynamic does exist in Resident Evil 4. It just doesn't exist until you get to the castle, which is the second main area of the game, and like 5-6 hours in.
Oh, see, I played like 2 to 3, probably closer to 3.
Yeah, it's a good ways in there before you walk into the castle. So it is there. It's just, you gotta get through a lot of stuff that it sounds like is not your bag to get there, and that makes perfect sense.
That's frustrating.
Like I said, actually finished playing like 2 days ago. It's fine. I agree that it is one of the most influential games like ever, but going from RE2, the remake, to RE4, boy, you can see the cracks real quick. And I didn't have a problem with Leon's aiming being stiff. I had the opposite problem. I had the problem where a slight nudge of the analog stick and he like aims 6 feet away from where he was before. Which I think part of that is intentional, because I think it's meant to be like, oh, you're panicking, you're going to waste ammo. I think that works fine in an actual like straight horror game. Not in a game where you are fighting several waves of enemies all the time.
Oh, yeah, it's a ton of enemies. And again, survival horror, only so much ammo. Did you play on Nintendo Switch?
I played it on PC. I owned it on Steam, even though I'm told the PC version is not great. I didn't have any huge problems with it. It crashed to desktop exactly once after a very long sequence that I had to then do all over again, so that part was kind of frustrating. But other than that, it worked fine, it sounded fine, it played fine.
I know we mentioned during the Metroid Prime episode where there are 4 games that usually come up as like the best GameCube games of all time that like jockey for that position on lists. I mean, it's Metroid Prime, it's Resident Evil 4, it's Wind Waker, and it's Super Smash Bros. Melee. 3 of those games I would go back and play each and every time. RE4 is not one of the 3.
That being said, though, it is regularly put on lists of like best games ever made. And I don't think I agree with that. Influential, yes. It didn't feel... Nowadays, going back to it, at the year of our Lord 2021, it's outdated now. But they're remaking it, so who knows how that's going to turn out. So, Resident Evil 4's development history is actually kind of legendary in how weird it was and how many different forms it existed in before we got the game that we got. So, the project was at first led by the A team of producer Shinji Mikami and director Hideki Kamiya. If you recognize those names, Shinji Mikami was one of the people that was behind the original creation of the first Resident Evil, and Hideki Kamiya had been involved in RE2, and then shortly after making another game, he left Capcom and is now like one of the head figures at Platinum. So he was one of the guys behind Bayonetta.
Yeah, we brought him up for Okami, Bayonetta. That's a powerful combination of duo for sure.
So oddly enough, though, it seems the one aspect that was a constant between all prototypes was that the game was always placed in Europe in some form or another. Like, apparently, the team, like, went to the UK and Spain and just took pictures of the architecture and, like, bricks and pavement, and then those were used as, like, textures in the game later on. So that seems to have been a constant. The only constant, really. Because one of the things that Kamiya wanted to change up about these games was he wanted the game to be more action-based. He wanted it to embody the concepts of cool and stylish. Those were his main word anchors. Does that perhaps sound familiar? Probably. We'll get to that. The original story of Resident Evil 4, of the first thing that was supposed to be RE4, followed an invincible and hyper-intelligent man named Tony, given superpowers by biotechnology developed by Umbrella. And during the production of this prototype, Kamiya remarked that the battles just didn't feel heroic enough if they used Resident Evil's signature static camera and pre-rendered backgrounds, so they threw both of those into the trash and made 3D environments and a more dynamically moving camera, I guess.
Is it weird that when I hear the name Tony and superpowers, I just think of like Obadiah Stane in Iron Man, be like, Tony!
Yeah. So, unfortunately, try as they might, it turns out that if you're making a horror game, trying to embody the aspects of cool and stylish are literally the opposite of what you should be doing. Because in order for horror to work, the main character has to be at least somewhat vulnerable. So Mikami eventually was like, hey, we are far out of survival horror now. Like, this should probably just be its own IP. To which they agreed, and so Kamiya left Resident Evil 4's team, essentially, to focus on this new game. Tony was changed to Dante, Biotech was changed to Demons, and this Resident Evil 4 prototype was officially renamed to Devil May Cry and released in 2001 for the PlayStation 2. That's the most famous one, I think, of like, oh yeah, Devil May Cry started as a Resident Evil game. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's a pretty well-known story. When we eventually cover Devil May Cry, I'm sure we'll bring it up again, but good to finally bring it up here on this show.
I feel like we might have brought it up during the DMC3 episode, but that was 2 years ago, and I don't remember anything I said last week. So, so after the completion and release of Devil May Cry, production on Resident Evil 4 was fully rebooted, and from here began the prototypes that we have names for, starting with the Fog version. This version followed Leon as he worked to infiltrate the castle-like zombie-filled European headquarters of Umbrella, and there was also apparently a girl in this version that was not Ashley, but she was never shown to the public. The devs say that she was there, we're just gonna have to believe them. After this, in 2003, Capcom showed off a different version of the game known as the Hookman version, or as later materials would refer to it, Maboroshi no Biohazard 4, or The Phantom Biohazard 4. This version would see Leon fighting his way through a haunted building after contracting some form of supernatural disease, and the name Hookman comes from a prominent enemy that is basically a ghost dude with a hook, a big hook. That's it. That's the whole thing. So, this is also the first version to feature the over-the-shoulder camera angle, and it's one of the only ones that we actually have game footage of, because like it was shown off at E3. Like 5 minutes of gameplay footage of this version of the game exist. And it was also the first version to have QuickTime events, because this is one of the games where that whole trend started as well, for better or for worse. I think the main one that shot off the QuickTime event craze was God of War, but I believe Resident Evil 4 did it first.
Well, they came out in the same year. And, actually, Resident Evil 4 may have done it first. For those unfamiliar with the term, you're watching a cutscene, a story moment, and then suddenly a button prompt comes up, and you're expecting the player has to push that button in a small period of time so that the story can continue. It's met with mixed reception and not so common these days.
Yeah, we don't really do them very much now. I think that Resident Evil 4 has the single most egregious example of QuickTime events. Like, the rest of the game, whatever. They kind of suck, but whatever. But there's one part where it's like a 5-minute cutscene with like 6 QuickTime events in it. And if you miss any of them, you just die. And you have to start the cutscene over again.
Oh, it's awful.
It's bad. It's really bad. We don't see that very often in games anymore, and there's a reason for it. But this version also featured, like, a bunch of features that aren't in Resident Evil 4 as we know it today. Like, apparently there were dialogue options? Like, dialogue trees at some point? That's weird to think about. The last prototype before the project became what we know today is referred to as the, quote, hallucination version, which is a great name. This would take place in a castle where Leon was exploring said castle and helping a young girl and a bioweapon-enhanced dog get to the top of the castle. This version was apparently scrapped before a large amount of work was done on it, because they figured out that the time and resources it would require to put this game together were just too great, and they just decided that it wasn't really worth it. It is interesting to note, though, and while I can never find any information that corroborates a connection between these two games, in 2005, Capcom also released the survival horror game Haunting Ground, which is about a girl and a dog making their way up to the top of a creepy castle. So, I've never been able to find anything that says that it was a scrapped RE4 prototype, but it seems pretty clear. That's a little much from the same company. Come on. From there, they tried one more time with another prototype featuring zombies. However, this version was considered to be far too formulaic, and it was never shown to the public, and it essentially just got shot down before it even had a point to start. And then after all that, Shinji Mikami and the team made a decision that they were going to reinvent Resident Evil. They weren't going to lean on the other games anymore. So Mikami himself wrote a new scenario that was not related to Umbrella basically at all. And the RE4 we know today was born. Now, the other part of Resident Evil's story, and actually my real favorite part, is that Resident Evil 4 was officially announced in 2002 as a GameCube exclusive. And it was a member of one of the legendary Capcom 5.
Ah, yes.
So for anybody that does not know, the Capcom 5 was 5 games that Capcom had basically implied were all going to be GameCube exclusives because they had struck a deal with Nintendo. These games included, of course, Resident Evil 4, PN03, Beautiful Joe, Dead Phoenix, and Killer 7. All of them were announced to be on GameCube and only GameCube. And then later on, Capcom USA was like, what we meant to say is that only RE4 is going to be a GameCube exclusive. So where did all of these titles end up? Well, PN03 released in 2003. It is a game that I've never even seen footage of. It's a third-person shooter, I guess. And it's the only one that stayed exclusive to the GameCube. Meanwhile, Beautiful Joe released in 2003 and was exclusive for 1 year before also releasing in 2004 on the PlayStation 2. Dead Phoenix was canceled altogether and never came out on anything. And the only one that just straight up did not pretend that it was going to be a GameCube exclusive was Killer 7, which released on both GameCube and PlayStation 2 in 2005. And then lastly, as I said earlier, Resident Evil 4 is one of the most ported games ever. They put it on everything. Famously, Shinji Mikami was so confident that Resident Evil 4 would not see a release outside of the GameCube version that he jokingly claimed he would, quote, cut his own head off if it did. It didn't even take a year from release. Resident Evil 4 was on PS2 by October of 2005. Like, maybe 6 months. And apparently when asked about it, Capcom claimed that it actually didn't fall under the exclusivity deal with Nintendo.
When the publisher makes those kind of calls, the developer doesn't really get to call the shot.
Yep. It's unfortunate. And I believe it was directly a response to, hey, the GameCube's selling bad. It's not selling well. Why would we keep our games on that? Which I get, but also it's kind of a dick move to just be like, yeah, we'll make 5 exclusives for your system. Oh, sorry, we only meant 1 exclusive. Oh, sorry, that's not the one we were talking about. It's dumb. So Resident Evil 4 is among one of the most critically praised games of all time. Not like top 10. I think I went to Metacritic to go look. It's like top 50, but it used to be a lot higher. And many publications regularly include it on their list of like the best games ever made. It currently sits at a 96 on Metacritic. One of the main points of praise was the fact that Capcom hired real voice actors to play the characters instead of what had been their PS1 strategy of grab whoever's around and they record the lines now. The inventory system also, by the way, the attaché case, one of the best inventory systems in video game history. Oh my god, it's so satisfying to use. I love it. And people apparently are hoping that they take it out of the remake, to which I say, what is wrong with you? It's the best. But yeah, it was at the time named Game of the Year by the Spike Video Game Awards. Nintendo Power and Game Informer also gave it their Game of the Year titles. It tied for Famitsu's Game of the Year with none other than my favorite game of all time, Kingdom Hearts 2. Also, IGN gave it Best Artistic Design, and then it was also nominated at the IGDA for the Visual Arts Award, but it lost that award to Shadow of the Colossus, which, yeah, that checks out.
05, a pretty good year.
05 was a pretty good year, it turns out. So by January 2006, the game had sold over 3 million copies worldwide, and I was shocked to get an update to that because as of September 2020, Resident Evil 4 has sold over 10.4 million copies across all platforms, making it the best-selling game of the franchise until 2017 when it was surpassed by Resident Evil 7.
That's incredible. And I think that just shows like the growth of the gaming audience in even the last decade. I mean, that's amazing for as many versions of Resident Evil 4 that exist. For RE7 to just, boom, pass it.
Especially consider, like, RE7 is on 3 systems, technically.
Yeah. Yeah, PS4, Xbox One, PC. Hey, do you count it just launched on Stadia? Do you count it? I don't know.
No, they just added a search bar. I don't count them for anything. It's also on Switch in Japan, but nowhere else.
Right. Yes, the cloud version. Uh-huh.
But RE4 was also sort of seen, for better or for worse, the beginning point of the franchise becoming more and more action-oriented as it went on. Resident Evil 3 is really the one where it started happening because, you know, Nemesis, he wasn't really a passive threat like zombies are. And this game just sort of cranked it up to 11. And this kind of also changed the face of the survival horror genre. Like, for a very long time, franchises like Silent Hill and Alone in the Dark had, like, reboots that tried to capitalize on RE4's popularity, where they were like, oh, we can make an action-based horror game too. And both those games suck. The camera angle, though, as I mentioned before, the over-the-shoulder thing, it's basically become an industry standard for third-person shooters, especially, like, if you're gutting the iron sights up and it zooms in, you can see basically that in every third-person shooter there's ever been. And Resident Evil 4 is the reason for that. You can see it in franchises like Fallout or Mass Effect or Uncharted, Last of Us, just all sorts of stuff. Resident Evil is the one that started that. In fact, we mentioned the release relationship between RE4 and God of War, but God of War 2018 actually also cites Resident Evil 4 as an inspiration when it comes to the camera angle.
Yep.
So this game basically codified third-person shooters in the way that, like, Mario 64 codified 3D platformers. It's a revolutionary game. And then in terms of, like, tone, RE4 is actually cited as being inspirations for a ton of games as well, being like The Last of Us, I guess. Naughty Dog mentioned Resident Evil 4 as an inspiration on that. BioShock, which that one sort of makes sense, even though it's a first-person shooter. But, like, tone-wise, they're kind of similar.
You get spooky creatures, and there's some survival horror elements there. I get it.
But apparently also Resident Evil 4 is the game that is credited with popularizing the idea of releasing a remastered version of a game. I don't know how accurate that is, but I mean, again, it's like one of the most ported games there's ever been. So I guess that does sort of check out.
If you want to chalk it up to one game having that credit, I have no problem with that being RE4.
Anyways, the point is, you can play this game everywhere. If you have a device that came out after the year 2005 that can play video games in any way, shape, or form, you probably have access to the ability to buy and play Resident Evil 4. It's on everything. The fact that it's not already on PS5 and Xbox Series X is baffling to me.
Give it time.
Yeah, but also, Capcom is remaking it right now for some reason. Even though I think it's the one in the series that least needs a remake. Because again, it's already available on literally everything. But whatever. I'm kind of interested to see the different directions they go with it. And if they fix certain entire areas of Resident Evil 4. Which I'll get to in the critical tracks.
Hey, I know I would love to play a remastered version. Fix some of those old game issues.
Just put it on the RE engine. Bam. That does sound great already.
Yes.
So in terms of composers, the lead composer of Resident Evil 4 is a woman named Misao Senbongi. Her first sound work with Capcom was during the development of the very first Resident Evil 4 prototype, and that's sort of how she ended up being one of the composers behind the original Devil May Cry. People speculate that she has not only left Capcom as a company, but she might have just pieced out of the industry at large. because after 2011, her name has not really appeared in any game credit at all. So that's interesting. That's all the information I can find on her, too. Like, that's it. I don't have a blood type even. That's surprising.
Whoa.
So in terms of discography, she is credited as doing music for Devil May Cry, the GameCube remake of Resident Evil, which is another one of those, like, best games of all time contenders, which one day I gotta play. Of course, Resident Evil 4. She arranged multiple character themes on the Capcom side for Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. And she is credited for something on Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D, but VGMDB is the only one that listed that game in any way, shape, or form. This had to be cobbled together from multiple sources, all that were like missing certain games that other sources said, and it was weird. So, in terms of historical development research, again, there's also not really a lot to say. Like I said, Senbongi was the lead composer, but some pieces were apparently also made by Shusuke Uchiyama, who we haven't covered yet, but don't worry, he is already on the schedule for later this year. Hopefully. It's safe to assume that Senbongi is responsible for like most of these tracks, but there's no way to know, because the album is simply credited to Capcom Sound Team, and no amount of digging on VGMDB gave me any further information than this soundtrack was done by the Capcom Sound Team. Stop doing that. Credit your composers. Put their names in the tracks. Come on. Anyways, I've rambled on enough. We got to get into the 5 critical tracks, and the first one I think is actually the most interesting. It's Serenity. So when it came down to it, it was between this and the save theme. But honestly, I think this one has a bigger impact in-game. Like, the save theme is good, but it's like a 10-second loop. Because you're hearing it on a save screen. It goes away after like 20 seconds. But this song plays when you wander into an area where the merchant has set up shop. And we haven't even mentioned the merchant
Oh
yet.
my god.
The most famous video game salesman in video games.
What are you buying?
Yeah. Got a selection of rare things on sale, stranger. He's so good. He's great. And if you see him and his blue flame, that's a pretty good sign that you get a break from the action, because he will never show up where enemies can like be around. He's always in like a side area or at the very beginning of a chapter or something like that, where it's like, all right, take a break here. We can grab some of the free ammo he has sitting around. There's a typewriter you can save there, and then you can like buy stuff that'll help you kill zombies more. Except, notably, you can't buy ammo. Something I thought was super stupid when I walked into one of the sort of stands. He has like a stall somewhere in the game, and it's covered in ammo boxes, and he doesn't sell ammo. And I'm like, I can see like hundreds of shotgun shells behind you. What the hell? Give me my stuff. Anyways, this song is very cathartic when you hear it. It gives a sigh of relief. Except, I learned that this is not an original composition. This song was originally written by a man named David Torn, and it was originally released as To Burble and Pine off his album Pandora's Toolbox. And it has apparently shown up in more than just Resident Evil 4. All of them like in a slightly altered manner. Like Resident Evil 4 slows it down just a tad. But it is also in Devil May Cry. The song's titled Ancient Castle there. It's in the original Monster Hunter under the title Beyond the Fog. And apparently it's even featured as an unused track on the official release of the Silent Hill Origins OST. So how did this happen? Well, it's kind of hard because the information is kind of scattered and everything. From what I could tell, looking at like Reddits and stuff. A company that I could only find being referenced as BT ripped the song off of the Pandora's Toolbox album and then stuck it in like one of those stock audio bed databases that you could pay to have access to. And Torn had no idea that this was happening. In fact, based on a tweet I found, he didn't know it was happening until 2019, 13 years after the release of Resident Evil 4.
Oh my gosh.
So that's interesting. RE4 seems to be the, like, latest in that list. But yeah, that was an interesting story to just sort of wander into.
Yeah, wow. That's definitely notable. I'm glad you could bring that to the show. And yeah, it kind of sounds in a way like it could be stock music. It's a lot of just kind of dark environmental synths. And I can see how that's really a sigh of relief when you get to the Merchant. Yeah, gosh, a famous character. How had we not brought up that character? Oh my gosh.
Every game since has tried to make their own merchant, or they just give up. But none of them have ever gotten as good as the Resident Evil 4 merchant. He's the best. He's so weirdly compelling, and I also spent the entire game being like, how did you get here, man? We're in the middle of a castle. It took me like 5 hours to get here. How did you get here before me? Anyways, critical check number 2 is a piece called Infiltration. I actually really kind of like this song. It's got like a really heavy drum part, which sort of drives some tension. It just feels tense. I like it. And it's first heard, I think, in the castle. I only remember hearing it first in the castle. Maybe it plays somewhere else, I don't know, but it also plays in some parts on the island, which we will talk about in a minute. But yeah, I think this is my favorite song on the soundtrack. It's got a good rhythm to it, and it's got a really good, like, it kind of feels like you're getting ready to go do something big.
I get some Metal Gear vibes from it. I kind of get that sense, but yeah, it's a really cool, driving for as much as a kind of atmospheric piece is going to be in Resident Evil 4. It's a pretty good driving pace. Yeah,
you want Metal Gear? We'll get to Metal Gear, because there's a song on my cutting room floor that might as well be ripped out of a Metal Gear game. So, critical check number 3, though, before we get there, is Salazar. I imagine Salazar is like another character some people might know just from osmosis. He's the little Napoleon dude.
Oh, yeah.
I always, in-game, like, every time I was playing, would shout, "Where are you, you Napoleonic," word I can't say on this PG show. And eventually, like everything in Resident Evil, he turns into a big, gross monster, which I can't wait to see Lady D turn into one of those. For sure it's going to happen. And then you fight him. That's all it is. This is the music that plays during said boss fight. It kind of sounds like Castlevania.
It's the organs, for sure.
Yeah, the pipe organ really gives it that sort of Castlevania feel. That being said, when I played, I did not hear much of this song because watching LPs for years led me to know the strategy for ending the fight in like 2 minutes. And if you would like to know, kids, He's got his little head thing, and he's got like a cage over his real body, which is what you're actually supposed to shoot to kill him. And this little second head has an eye. If you shoot that eye enough times, eventually he opens the cage and it's like, what? And then you pull out a rocket launcher and shoot it at him, and then he's dead. So pro tip there.
It's a neat piece though to hear, because yeah, I think you're right. The organs just really kind of bring in that boss fight feel.
Also the castle aesthetic, like
yeah,
really, really helps with the organs and all that.
You're trying to do Gothic architecture. I think that checks out.
So when we talk about horror games, one of the problems is that a lot of horror soundtracks are just sort of ambiance, like creepy ambiance, and that's fine in game. Doesn't really make for compelling conversation on a podcast, but this is one of those pieces that just sticks with you even if it's just ambiance. Critical track number 4 is Regenerator. Spelled with a D on the official release. I don't know why.
I wonder if there's like some Spanish pronunciation where it's like Regenerador.
Maybe? I don't know. The enemies are called Regenerators with a T, obviously. The last area of the game is an area called the Island. And I had been warned ahead of time that, basically nobody likes the Island. It has that unfortunate Resident Evil tradition of the last area always kind of sucks. But the Island is especially egregious because it just sort of stops pretending it's a horror game, and then it's like, there's like 20 people, fight them all, kill all of them. And it does that multiple times. But there's a small pocket of 20 to 30 minutes where it actually introduces the most terrifying enemies in any Resident Evil game, actually. Well, it's between that and Lickers. Regenerators, or later on, they also introduce a variant called Iron Maidens, which are just regenerators with spikes that they can shoot out of their body. Super fun. They are like these weird, featureless, gray creatures that make this really creepy sound, and then this ambiance is what plays when it sees you and it's coming. And it is so effective. And then like 25 minutes later, it gives you the item that lets you kill them and they stop being scary altogether. But for that little brief window, this song and those sounds and the whole general atmosphere of the scene is just, it's to me a sign that the team could have made RE2 years ago and they just weren't given the resources, basically.
I can tell then, if you had that kind of powerful experience, how this ambiance would be so powerful. Does it have the same effect on its own to someone who has not played it? No, not necessarily. But, for a powerful gameplay experience, like that's the power of games, right? With pairing a game experience with the music track that it goes with. I mean, that's why we do this show.
So I had known about regenerators for several years before this, because again, I've watched multiple Let's Plays of Resident Evil 4 just on the side. I still wasn't ready. They're really scary. They're really creepy, and the way they're introduced is amazing. So, yeah. Critical track number 5. Let's get into it. It is the creatively named Final Battle. Eventually, you and Ada Wong are at the top of something somewhere in the island. and Salazar turns himself into a big bug man, and this is the song that plays when you're fighting his big bug man form. It's very tense, it's kind of bombastic. The final boss of Resident Evil 4 is not great. It's not super great, but I think it should be here simply because, like, Salazar is kind of the most infuriatingly smug antagonist in video games, and this fight is just memorable. It's the final boss, but I really don't think I have a lot more to say about this song. I'll be real.
It's probably one of the more exciting pieces on the soundtrack, honestly, and it kind of gives you that, final battle feeling with the choirs mixed in with the instrumentation. So I can see it. It kind of puts a narrative cap on things.
Yeah, that's about the best that it can be put, I think. So, you have a track on the cutting room floor that kind of resulted out of something, the ether, I guess. What do you got?
Well, if there was one piece I knew from this game, it was actually the save theme. Early draft of the Critical 5, you had it. I'm like, nope, you covered it. I'm good. Well, we kind of shuffle things around a little bit. It has me picking up the pieces here. I feel like this soundtrack isn't up there as far as like, best game soundtracks of all time, because it's survival horror ambiance, and it does that very well. But you're not having specific pieces stand out, and yet I feel like this save theme in particular in the Resident Evil franchise is one that stands out. You're right, it is a simple loop, but the instrumentation here is simple and memorable.
And it really doesn't have to be a very complex loop. Again, you hear it for maybe 10 seconds while your save is being overwritten, and then it leaves the screen and the song goes away. So it would be weird to expect it to be like a long loop, but I don't know. I mainly switched it over when I found the trivia about Serenity, because that just seemed like a fun thing to talk about. On my end of the cutting room floor, my first is The Drive First Contact. Con alegría, con alegría. This plays during the intro scene where Leon is riding in the back of a car with two Spanish police officers in front of him, and they're talking to him like, "What are you doing here, Americano?" or something. Not a great kind of stereotype. But this song, though, this is not a song I expected to hear in a Resident Evil game. And there's one other song like that, but it's not anywhere on the thing. Go listen to the credits song of Resident Evil 4 if you want some jarring change of tone. But this song works really well because you're in Spain. This is a great way to sort of communicate that, I guess. And also damn, that guitar is some good stuff.
Yeah, sets the tone immediately. Good performance. I didn't expect to have it here, even though I've played through that beginning part of the game. But yeah, that's a nice inclusion. To
be fair, I played the game 3 days ago. I didn't remember that song played that sequence.
Well, that means probably in the background, to be fair.
And my second song on the cutting room floor is Krauser. This plays during the only, one of the only two good moments on the island, as you have a boss fight with Krauser, who is Leon's old partner and is also secretly working for Umbrella to get Las Plagas for themselves. And this song is literally what if Resident Evil 4 was just Snake Eater?
Whoa, it sure is. Wow.
This song just sounds like they ripped it out of MGS3. It's a cool boss fight, but I find it really funny how I hear this song and I don't even know. I feel like MGS3 came out. Did it come out after or before RE4?
Oh, 4.
Yeah, so it came out before RE4. So, yeah, it's weird. It's bizarre. So what will I never forget about Resident Evil 4? I mean, I think everything up to the island is really well done. The castle is obviously the best part of the game, and it kind of sucks that it's the pretty much midpoint of the game. Unfortunately, regenerators are absolutely terrifying, and wow, I'm terrified of what they're going to do with the remake with those, because that sounds awful. And Ashley is surprisingly one of the least bad escort mission characters I've ever encountered. She stays behind you when you're aiming your gun. If she's in front of you when you aim your gun, she gets down. She stays with you unless you tell her not to. After playing Silent Hill 4 last year, boy, that was refreshing. But yeah, that's all I got on Resident Evil 4. I think that's mostly what I'm going to remember. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what they do with the remake.
Yeah, so am I. I'm going to keep my eyes peeled for that one.
So for our transition, we like to cover a fan remix or cover, usually from YouTube. We say it could be from OST remix and all that. Sometimes it is, but it's usually from YouTube, including this one, which is a piano duet cover of the Save Room theme by YouTuber Jonathan Morais. That's Morais. So please enjoy that. We will be right back.
All right, so from Resident Evil 4 becomes Devil May Cry becomes Resident Evil 4 again, we have Project Dream becomes Banjo-Kazooie. Now, Banjo-Kazooie, how have we not talked about this game, this soundtrack on Original Soundchat before? Well, it's because we've already covered Grant Kirkhope, who did the music, the audio, like the only musician attached to Banjo-Kazooie. And we covered him on our episode for Donkey Kong 64 on episode 15. And so it was only really this year that we started to have a little more flexibility with who can we talk about instead. To be honest, the solution is a little more roundabout for this one, but, we had to eventually talk about Banjo-Kazooie at some point. So here we go. The game released on June 29th, 1998 in North America for Nintendo 64. Europe got the game on July 17th, 1998. Then an HD remastered version. So here we go. We talk about remastered versions. It released on Xbox 360 on November 26th, 2008. This version of the game is currently accessible on the Xbox platform. Also, with Microsoft owning Rare and all that. But it's available through backwards compatibility, even up to I think 4K visuals. They scale up that resolution pretty nicely. So if you're looking to play Banjo-Kazooie today, that's probably the place you can get that, whether it's through Rare Replay or go buy the old Xbox Live Arcade version and have it go all the way up to a Series X if you own a Series X.
It's also technically on Game Pass because Rare Replay is on Game Pass.
Well, there you go. And it's also the version because of certain changes in the game. It's the version that's most friendly to newcomers. The game is developed by Rare, and the original Nintendo 64 version was published by Nintendo. Banjo-Kazooie is a 3D platformer collectathon, with the third-person perspective, not over Banjo's shoulder, but, it'll do. In a way, it's like trying to be what Super Mario 64 was a couple years earlier, but better. There are 9 3D worlds in the game in which the player must collect music notes. There are about 900 total, and puzzle pieces called jiggies, which you collect by completing specific tasks. There are 100 total in the game, along with other collectibles in each environment. So the bear Banjo and the bird Kazooie team up for simple skills such as rolling, there's a peck attack, a double jump, but they can also learn special skills such as spitting out egg projectiles or temporarily flying. The plot of Banjo-Kazooie is kind of laid out right at the beginning. It's pretty simple. In a region called Spiral Mountain, a foul-tempered witch named Gruntilda learns from her cauldron, Dingpot, that Tootie, a brown honey bear living nearby, is more beautiful than her. Jealous, Gruntilda creates a machine to transfer an entity's beauty to another, which she intends to use with Tootie. Gruntilda kidnaps Tootie while her older brother, Banjo, is sleeping. Banjo's friend Kazooie, a female red-crested Bree gull, wakes him up, and the two resolve to rescue Tootie. While Banjo and Kazooie collect musical notes and jiggies to traverse through Gruntilda's lair, they are aided by Bottles, a mole and Tootie's friend, and Mumbo Jumbo, a shaman who used to be Gruntilda's teacher. They also rescue Jinjos, small creatures that Gruntilda imprisoned in each world. So, the big question, can Banjo and Kazooie rescue Tootie and put a stop to Gruntilda's schemes? Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with Banjo-Kazooie?
I love Banjo-Kazooie. I think it's great. It's apparently considered a hot take to say that it's better than Mario 64, but how would it not be? It had Mario 64 to build off of. What?
Of course it's better. I mean, it didn't do more for the industry, but of course it's better.
It had the template that Mario 64 didn't have. That automatically probably makes it way better. Not that I'm saying that Mario 64 is not good. Obviously, I love Mario 64. But Banjo-Kazooie is just fantastic. I didn't get to play it until I was an adult, when I played it on the original N64. I hadn't actually touched the Xbox versions until last year, when I replayed Banjo-Kazooie and did all 100 jiggies, all 900 notes, etc., etc. It still holds up, especially with the changes that the Xbox version made with one specific collectible.
Yeah, the biggest change, let's put it out there, is that on the N64 version, when you went into a world and you have 100 music notes to collect, you had to do all of those in one fell swoop. You couldn't leave and come back later, and it wouldn't save your progress. On the Xbox 360 version, you could collect some, you can leave, you can come back, and the ones you've already collected are off the map. You've collected them. You get to continue. Not the case with N64 and its limited memory.
Yeah, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but it's a pretty big deal once you have a fix for it, and you're like, oh, it turns out that thing was bad. So yeah, I love Banjo-Kazooie. We did an episode on Banjo-Tooie for Smasherpieces last year too, where we kind of talked about how it's not as good as Banjo-Kazooie. I think Banjo-Kazooie is possibly among the best games on the N64 for absolute sure.
Oh, yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think it also really holds up as far as just 3D platformer collectathons go. It's a great game, for sure. I had watched friends play it while I was growing up as someone who did not have a Nintendo 64 to myself, but I got to play the game finally with that Xbox 360 version. Probably played it around 2013, 2014. Had a great time playing it. I streamed it. Had friends, help with some of the finer points with getting that 100% completion. Did that. Makes the final boss much more reasonable, I think. And yeah, it's just a great experience with characters that are so likable, clever writing, solid mechanics, and just enjoyable worlds to explore and collect all those collectibles in. a great game that still holds up today, I think.
I feel it's my place, though, to say I hate the final boss of Banjo-Kazooie. I think it sucks.
It's tiresome. That's for sure. But overall, I mean, it is a game that has a memorable soundtrack because, Nintendo 64 at the time, especially when you get great composers like Grant Kirkhope, simple melodies that you use the instrumentation to not only accent the environment that you're in, but also just to complement all the pieces together and make sure that melody is coming through clearly, or it's being complemented by a counter melody. It's just one that we had to bring up on the show, and I'm glad we finally have a way to do so, even if it's a bit obscure. So when it comes to Banjo-Kazooie's development history, we do have to mention the advanced computer modeling graphics technology that Rare had at the time. This is something that you brought up on our episode about Donkey Kong Country. And this is because the development team from Donkey Kong Country 2 decided to use that graphics technology of kind of having these 3D models compressed into 2D space to make really good graphics on the Super Nintendo. They wanted to use that technology to start their own game franchise instead of here we are at Rare and we're doing a Donkey Kong platforming game. And so this idea of Project Dream started, and it was developed for about 16 months. It starred a boy who got into trouble with a group of pirates. It was inspired by Japanese role-playing games and LucasArts adventure games. And over time, the main character was changed from a rabbit, then he was a bear, and then the Nintendo 64 came along, which really, with its 3D graphics technology, really made the advanced computer modeling technology obsolete. So at this point, this RPG concept of Project Dream had become too ambitious, and the developers were just going to make another Donkey Kong-like platformer with Project Dream. But then Super Mario 64 set the standard of 3D games on this new console and really would have made Project Dream look outdated by comparison. So work on it was totally scrapped and they retooled it into a 3D platformer. Actual work on Banjo-Kazooie started in March 1997 with a development team of 10 people, with the team growing to a total of 15 members over time. Just if you want the breakdown out of curiosity, there were 7 engineers, 5 artists, 2 designers, and 1 musician. The overall development time of the game was 17 months to complete after Rare discarded Project Dream, and the first 2 of these were spent, just experimenting with Dream's graphics technology. So Banjo was the original main character of the game. You kind of see that highlighted in Diddy Kong Racing, where it's just like, I'm Banjo, and he's by himself, right? When he was a playable character in that racing game. But then Kazooie was created to justify some of the desired platforming abilities. Like, well, if Banjo has a double jump, we kind of envision wings coming out of his backpack. Well, bears don't have wings.
Far as we know.
Well, okay, so maybe we create a bird character, and then what's that character story? Let's make it a her and have her be sassy and just great. Kazooie's great.
She is somehow not one of the most offensive characters in video games, which back then was a problem. Every time a lot of game studios tried to be like, we've made our sassy character that has attitude, it's like, oh, so you mean they're annoying? That's what you're telling me. And Kazooie somehow managed to avoid that trap, and it's great. She's amazing.
Absolutely. So Banjo and Kazooie explore 9 worlds in the game. These are Mumbo's Mountain, Treasure Trove Cove, Clanker's Cavern, Bubble Gloop Swamp, Freezeezy Peak, Gobi's Valley, Mad Monster Mansion, Rusty Bucket Bay, and the Click Clock Wood. So a lot of memorable places there. I'm sure if you've played Banjo-Kazooie before and I list all those off, you can envision what the level is. It's a powerful example of the game's really good game and level design. Overall, the game is meant to have a Disney-like appeal, with characters that immediately appeal to young children, but a humor and an attitude that doesn't discourage older players. The decision to use a mumble talk system, as using voice samples and kind of repeating them to get a kind of expression, this was done to convey the personalities of the characters without them actually speaking, as Rare felt that actual speech, quote, could ruin the player's perception of the characters. Also, here's a big deal. There was only so much storage space on a Nintendo 64 cartridge.
Yeah, you weren't putting voiceover in that game. It just wasn't going to happen.
For how wordy it is, yeah, this was the best solution, to have them just go, and they have that be how they talk while you have the words on screen. Rare originally planned to include a multiplayer mode and more worlds in the game, but these features weren't implemented due to time constraints, 17 months. Also, some of these were later included in the game's sequel, Banjo-Tooie. In addition, a feature called Stop and Swap, which would have allowed data to be transferred from Banjo-Kazooie to Donkey Kong 64 and Banjo-Tooie, remains incomplete in the game. The feature was never fully implemented due to technical difficulties in the Nintendo 64 hardware, but it was realized on the Xbox 360 remaster release. You can bring your save file over and get special items. It's pretty neat.
I had to do it to beat the final boss of Banjo-Tooie because somehow they ruined aiming in that game.
Mm-hmm.
And the final boss sucks because of that in that game. So if you don't have homing eggs in the 360 version, you lose. So
definitely check out your Smash Your Pieces episode on that for more information there. Overall, Banjo-Kazooie reviewed very well, with a Metacritic and Game Rankings average of 92%. It is generally seen as taking Super Mario 64's foundations to the next level. You have the gameplay, the level design, the humor, the music, the visual effects, and performance. More, even beyond that, were highlights in the game. But a flawed camera system and a frustrating underwater level, looking at you, Rusty Bucket Bay, were seen as critiques overall.
Rusty Bucket Bay is mean. And yeah, it has pretty good music, but I don't care. It sucks. That world sucks. Oh my god, it's bad.
Overall, sales are estimated at 3.65 million units sold on Nintendo 64, making it the 10th best-selling game on the platform. No data out there seemingly to talk about how the Xbox 360 version sold. During its award season, Banjo-Kazooie received 2 awards during the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences Awards. Now we know it as DICE. These were winning Console Action Game of the Year and Outstanding Achievement in Art and Graphics. It was also nominated for Game of the Year and Console Adventure Game of the Year. IGN awarded the game overall Best Graphics, Best Texture Design, and Best Music in its 1998 awards. As far as Banjo-Kazooie's legacy, oh boy. Well, there's a sequel, Banjo-Tooie, and it released for Nintendo 64 in 2000. There were a couple Game Boy Advance games, Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge and Banjo Pilot. Those were released in 2003 and 2005 respectively. And then at the end of Banjo-Tooie, Gruntilda says, wait until Banjo 3E. And so for years, everyone, when's Banjo 3E gonna happen? Well, Microsoft bought Rare. There's that whole story. And then in 2008, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts released on Xbox 360. It's more of a vehicle-based game. Not really what fans were expecting. Some people like that game a lot, but it definitely strays from the formula that the franchise had established up until that point. Then in the same year, in 2008, there was the HD remastered Xbox Live Arcade version, and that lives on in 2015's Rare Replay on Xbox One. Again, probably the best place to play Banjo-Kazooie if you are a newcomer. The formula of the 3D platformer collectathon in that vein of Banjo-Kazooie was so missed that a spiritual successor called Yooka-Laylee, which had a lot of the same people from Rare working on it, that was released in 2017, to some mixed reception. The Impossible Lair, the more Donkey Kong Country-like, much better, but not really Banjo related. Then, at E3 2019, Banjo-Kazooie was announced as a downloadable content character in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Showed off in June 2019, released that September. To this day, no Banjo 3E.
But who cares? Put Banjo-Kazooie in Killer Instinct. Do it, cowards.
Wow.
If a Battletoad can be in there, so can Banjo-Kazooie.
I guess. Smack Kazooie on the ground and cause some ultra combos.
I would buy a new Killer Instinct at full price twice if Banjo-Kazooie were playable.
I feel like you're not the only one. So, as we mentioned, Grant Kirkhope, the audio lead, the music lead, like he was the one musician. And that's it for Banjo-Kazooie. That was also the case pretty much for Banjo-Tooie as well. So what do we do? There's not like a musician we can go pull because it was Nintendo 64. It was programming things on a sound chip on the cartridge. We do have to go to Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts to talk about David Clynick. I'm sorry, David. I know you did not work on the original Banjo-Kazooie. It's just the way our show format works. We got to talk about someone. This is how we pull it in.
Neither of us have played Nuts and Bolts. I'm really sorry.
All the information I could really find on David Clynick, though, he seems to be based out of Leicester, England, in the United Kingdom. He plays the guitar. He's posed with the guitar, playing it in some... I found a MySpace page that was hooked up to that. Remember when we had MySpace pages? Oh, yeah, absolutely. He has his website at David Clynick. That's David, CLYNICK.com. And you can follow him on Twitter at Dave_Clynick. As far as his discography goes, he did the music, or at least contributed to the music, for Perfect Dark and Perfect Dark Zero, Conquer Live and Reloaded, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, Connect Sports, and Uno Rush. He did some audio mixing for Viva Pinata and Viva Pinata Trouble in Paradise, Connect Sports Season 2, Jetpack Refueled, which is part of the Rare Replay pack, and Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. Huh. That's pretty neat. And then in the meantime, he also composes some production music as well as some commercial and trailer work that you can see on his website. And that's all I've got for you on Dave Clynick. I'm sorry.
Hey, at least it's more than I got.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I had to bring someone in. So when it comes to talking about the historical development research for the music in Banjo-Kazooie, it goes back to Grant Kirkhope. And the music in the game was designed overall to gradually fade from one style to the next without pause, while the overall composition loops continuously. It is really cool, and I think there's two big examples where this shines, right? It's Gruntilda's Lair, which is the big hub world in the game where there's some puzzles there. You get some jiggies in there, but as you move throughout the big lair, the themes kind of change, especially as you get closer to the different worlds, and the loop continues as normal, but the instrumentation changes up seamlessly. It's really, really neat. The other one is the last main level, Click Clock Wood, where there is a seasonal theme to it. And so based on the season that you go to, whether it's, winter, spring, summer, or autumn, you have the instruments change, and sometimes even the time signature and the style of music. It is pretty neat there. Those are the biggest examples, but for the Nintendo 64, that really shines at the time. Being the audio lead, though, Kirkhope himself recorded some of the voices and sound effects. And again, because there was only so much space on the cartridge, he kind of needed to work with pitch shifting to reuse some samples, and also, again, to save on memory. So a lot of interesting little things where you see him in interviews and, through Let's Plays and whatnot, and there's a little sound effect that comes up. He's like, oh yeah, I did that, but it's me pitch shifted down.
I think Mumbo is a big example that he points to a lot.
Yes.
And Donkey Kong in DK64 is also him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same rationale. You got to mess with some of the pitch shifting, and he even mentioned how some of the characters in Banjo-Kazooie, like Clanker or like the ghost in Mad Monster Mansion, like those are just banjo noises, but pitch shifted and slowed down.
Nice.
So you do what you got to do. See, Grant Kirkhope had originally written music for Project Dream. And you write these music pieces based on, this is going to be for an RPG. Well, no, the project shifted to a platformer. And okay, so you have to write pieces for a platformer, I guess. And of course, with the goal of having it not sound like Mario. Koji Kondo has his own style. You don't want to emulate that. You want to make Banjo-Kazooie do things better than Super Mario 64. Make some improvements there. And so he has this platform style, but then he kind of wants the music to have its own feel besides, it's just a platformer. And so this is where he wants a quirky nature to it. And a lot of this oompa, 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 oompa kind of sound to the soundtrack. And where do you go for inspiration like that? You go to Danny Elfman, composer famously for The Simpsons, but specifically the score to the film Beetlejuice was an inspiration for that kind of quirky nature.
That checks out.
Yeah, for sure. Overall, though, this is Grant Kirkhope's first video game that he worked on the music completely by himself. Previous projects was, helping with projects, but this is his time to shine. And wow, what a soundtrack to really take the reins of and have it become your own. Just fantastic. And so when we get to the 5 critical tracks of Banjo-Kazooie, it's a tough call, maybe a little controversial, but let's get right into it. Let's start with the first critical track. This is Main Title.
Uh-huh.
I mean, this is your introduction to Banjo-Kazooie. You hear that banjo right away as far as the instrument goes, but even hearing, you got the instrument and then followed by banjo vocalizing. I mean, it's perfect. And then it gets right into the main theme of the game. So like this is, again, the opening title sequence. Hearing that banjo go da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and then Kazooie comes in with her little kazoo. Da, 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 da. These catchy little melodies that just play off of each other so well. It might as well just be the main theme of the franchise, honestly. It had to be here.
It is an iconic video game main theme. Like, just bar none. Probably one of the... If I had to really pick, it's Mario 64, sort of. But like, you don't think about Mario 64's title theme. Ocarina of Time, obviously, yes, 100%. And then it's this.
Those are definitely the big ones on N64 for sure.
So it's really good. And also the only time you ever see Banjo play a banjo or Kazooie blowing on a kazoo.
But, it's a fun little introduction to their characters, their personalities. It's just a good time all around. And it gets you in that musical mindset immediately. As we continue to the next critical track, again, has to be here. This one is Spiral Mountain. With another banjo-led melody piece, this plays in Spiral Mountain, which is the opening tutorial world, where you're learning about the basics of Banjo and Kazooie's movement. It is an iconic piece to the series, so much so that when Banjo-Kazooie were brought to Super Smash Bros. Brawl, Grant Kirkhope was invited as a Western composer, which, again, for Super Smash Bros. At the time, unheard of, to have an arrangement of Spiral Mountain introduce the character in that trailer. And what a fantastic piece. Granted, that Smash version, a little faster, a little livelier, but for this just kind of laid back piece as you're learning the basics, it's another catchy earworm of a melody, and it's an iconic piece. You know, how many pieces can we say that in this game? But it really does stand out.
Yeah, this is one of the catchiest songs in video games. Like, it's just infectious, and it feels real happy, and it feels very cartoony, and it really brings about the tone that they're really looking for, which is kind of ridiculous, but happy-go-lucky, etc., etc. I think this is my second favorite song on the soundtrack. It's fantastic.
It's definitely up there for me, but yeah, I do have a favorite, and we'll get to that one later. In the meantime, let's get to number 3 on the Critical 5. This is Gruntilda's Lair. Such a strong opening sequence for Banjo-Kazooie to get you sucked right into that world. First of all, the main title theme gets you immediately, but then learning the basics in Spiral Mountain, and then you see this big witch castle that is Gruntilda's face, and so you go in the mouth, and you're in one of the best hub worlds in games. Granted, you know, some of the puzzles may get a little tedious. There's some good shortcuts there, but as far as just personality, and especially how this piece changes throughout the environment of Gruntilda's Lair. And, you know, this part here at the beginning of the clip here, it's kind of the intro section, the foundation of Gruntilda's Lair, the melody that will be changed up with all these different instruments. And what a catchy little melody this is. Kind of starts in these low vibraphones. It has to have a little more sinister quality to it than the happy, plucky Spiral Mountain. But again, the foundation here is so strong and creates such an identity in Gruntilda's Lair.
So did you know that this isn't an original composition, though?
I didn't.
It is a song, I believe it's called Teddy Bear's Picnic. I guess the story's like Grant Kirkhope. I came across it and he was like, oh, this is perfect. And he redid it and he made all the different versions. And now everybody knows it as Gruntilda's Lair.
Well, isn't that another theme between our games then? With Serenity and Resident Evil 4.
It is one of the most catchy game hubs basically ever. I know I've now said that 3 times about all 3 tracks, but it's honestly true. You have Peach's Castle, and that's an iconic song.
Oh, sure.
But I think this one beats it out like 9 times out of 10, to be fair.
Just so much personality with all of the different worlds and then the surrounding Gruntilda's Lair environment with it. It's so good. And it's really telling that these first 3, you're like, they're iconic. It has to be here. And so it leaves 2 more spots. And what do you put in there? We put Freeze Easy Peak for number 4 on the Critical 5. You have a winter level in this game. You have great orchestration and instrumentation for a winter environment. Little sleigh bells, the trumpet going. Not a bad trumpet on Nintendo 64, let's be honest. but Freezeezy Peak is one of those classic winter levels in games, and the music here, I think, really only amplifies that. Gives you that Christmas vibe where Boggy's being a terrible deadbeat dad with his kids and, shorting you on gifts there. And you got the big Christmas tree and you got the snowman. Just a lot of great memories. This is probably, I think, one of the stronger levels in the game, just as far as like a single cohesive theme. And honestly, this piece, Freezeezy Peak, really jumps out and stands out and sets that mood perfectly.
All I hear when I hear this song is and then I get hit by a snowball
out of nowhere.
And so, I don't know, I have a love-hate relationship with Freezeezy Peak. I love the song. I love the aesthetic of the level. I hate those snowman enemies. Oh my god, they suck.
Get good at dive bombing them, man.
But they're also really satisfying to kill.
Yes. But man, it kind of sets a whole different tone here with this one. It's Christmas time. You get a different feel for the soundtrack. And then when we wrap things up in the Critical 5, what do we do? Do we go to the end of the game? Or do we go with the other song that just flows perfectly between all of its different iterations? This is Click Clock Wood. In particular, this is the spring iteration of the track. I feel like it has just the best instrumentation overall. Certainly the most peppy energy, as new life begins in spring. But I feel like it was also important to include here because there's an interesting bit of historical context to this piece. Because this melody was one of the original melodies, one of the original pieces that Grant Kirkhope composed, ideally for like the beginning of the game. So for like a Mumbo's Mountain or a Treasure Trove Cove. This was one of those original, let's make a platformer melody before it decided to get a little quirky. And so he kind of rediscovered this and it's like, oh yeah, let's use it. Let's kind of put it near the end of the game. He's just felt it fit the world that Click Clock Wood kind of presented. I think he's right. It does sound different because it's not as odd and quirky as the other ones, but oh my gosh, is it an earworm. This one in particular, really amps up the animal noises in there, and it just kind of gives a really nice atmosphere to it on a Nintendo 64 game. I mean, fantastic. When you're talking about like the differences between all of the seasons, summer is more of a slow 3/4 waltz. Autumn is a subdued swing piece. And winter channels some of those same instruments from Freezeezy Peak, where it's like it's a chilly vibe, has some glockenspiels in there. Just a big open level with all those different seasonal differences. But yeah, Click Clock Wood had to be here, I think.
Yeah, this song is great. It's definitely in like my top 3. But I hate Click Clock Wood. I hate playing it. I hate climbing that tree. It's frustrating. It's not as mean as Rusty Bucket Bay.
Sure.
Where you drown even if you're on top of the water. But like, I don't know. I don't like Click Clock Wood, but the spring version, I agree. It's the best version, like by far. I don't like the summer version. I think the bee buzzing it's a bit of a turnoff on my end. I don't know. Autumn is fine. And then winter, again, the snowmen show up on that version. So all I hear is, So, spring is by far like the best one. And yeah, the little bird chirps on some of the melody, they're really good. They give a lot of personality to the song. I agree. This is a great song.
Mm-hmm. Well, we both have songs on the cutting room floor because it was tough to leave songs on the cutting room floor. Joe, you have 2? Hit me with them.
Everybody's going to be really mad at us, so I'm going to leave this in the front. Rusty Bucket Bay is not on either of our cutting room floors. I know that's a popular one, but you drown above water in Rusty Bucket Bay. Anyways, my first song on the cutting room floor is Mad Monster Mansion. This is my favorite song on the soundtrack.
Ah, okay.
I absolutely adore it. I love the remix in Smash. Multiple people have done fantastic remixes of Mad Monster Mansion on YouTube, one of them being Megan McDuffie, who we talked about for her work on River City Girls. That's a really, really cool version. I dig most of Mad Monster Mansion. The church sucks, and that's really the only part that sucks. Having to get the notes on top of the pews with the stupid ghosts that path to you no matter where you are. That's the only part that isn't good. But this song is absolutely just it. This is Halloween as hell.
Yes, the monster horror vibes are strong in this. And again, like the sound effects for atmosphere, you're getting the owl hooting, the wolf howling. It's great stuff. The vibraphone, like I feel like the trill between like those like two kind of notes, like that's a Banjo-Kazooie staple, I think, in the melodies when you get the kind of going between a couple notes there. It just sounds so good. You're right, great piece for sure.
I think that's like one of Kirkhope's staples from this time, because I can draw a direct line between this and Creepy Castle from Donkey Kong 64. Like,
for sure.
Very, very similar songs. And it also employs the it's really cool. For my second track on the cutting room floor, it's Grunty's Furnace Fun. Near the end of the game, you like show up and Grunty's like, I'm gonna do a board game, and if you lose, you die. And so you do this interesting little board game. It's not the most amazing thing in the world, but it's fun enough. It's very unique.
It rewards player knowledge for playing the game.
It sure does, unless you step on one of the death spots that kills you instantly if you get the question wrong.
Oops.
Of which there are 2 right in front of Gruntilda. So, yeah, this is a very good song. It's basically like Grunty's Lair, but game show. It's very Price is Right almost. This is what I picture when I think about Price is Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's an important stage at the end to kind of reward all that knowledge, whether it's trivia questions or where does this sound effect play in music or just things like that. So it's really neat and kind of peps up that theme you've kind of been hearing throughout the game for sure.
The only part of Furnace Fun I think sucks is that you need to know all of the Brentilda knowledge, because A, finding her sucks, and B, why would I remember that? Why would I remember any of that?
To the point where I took comprehensive notes when I played in a notebook just so I could look it up. And then you only get so much time to answer the question, so it's tough to like find exactly. Anyway, my couple tracks on the cutting room floor. Let's start with one of the earlier levels in the game, Treasure Trove Cove. What an energetic, happy little melody that will stick with you, honestly, forever. Hearing this right again just brings me right back. It also just screams beach in its environment, its instrument choice, its atmosphere. even like little, do I hear like, waves almost crashing, or is that just me imagining it? I don't know. It's such a great piece. It's so catchy, and it was going to be on our cutting room floor, whether one of us picked it up or not.
Oh, yeah. And also, Yoko Shimomura did a remix in Smash, and it's super good.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Oh, my gosh. So fantastic. Wow. And one that killed me to cut from the Critical 5 because it's so great. It's my favorite. But we'll put it here, and at least it's here. It's Final Battle. To reach the true final boss battle in Banjo-Kazooie, you need to collect 810 out of the 900 notes and 94 out of the 100 jiggies. And as you mentioned, it's a tough final boss fight. Though if you do reach that 100% completion, you get extra bonuses that do help, honestly. Such a climactic final piece and really going all out with the instrumentation, but also really neat in how it is a compilation of themes throughout the game. I think it's a great example of how it really just brings things to a close. I really had a tough time, leaving this off. I think, some people could honestly make the case for it being part of the Critical 5. I certainly do prefer it as like, if I pick one song from this game, that's my favorite. But, I feel like overall it was a good Critical 5. At least this is here.
I may hate this boss, but this song is very good. But I can't stand the final boss of Banjo. It's too long, and there are 0 checkpoints, and it's so easy to just accidentally die in multiple phases of the fight. And I'm just not a big fan of this final boss, but this song is absolutely, as much as I love the music for Banjo-Tooie's final boss, I do prefer this one quite a bit.
It is fantastic. And what will I never forget about this game? Playing it for the first time there was the community element to it with streaming it, but so good that I 100% completed it on my first time playing Banjo-Kazooie. It is that good, even if you play it for the first time as an adult. So if you have not played that game, please do find a way to play it on Xbox Game Pass or wherever. It's definitely worth it, and it holds up today.
Yeah, it's like surprisingly holds up super hard, which is not something you could say about a lot of N64 games, unfortunately. Especially not ones that weren't made by Nintendo.
Right, yeah. Well, when it comes to 2 games with famous, historic examples of let's change our project scope and focus entirely in development. Also games that we had to get to on the show. Games that use samples from other works and kind of repurpose them. Great to talk about Resident Evil 4 and Banjo-Kazooie on this show. Finally! And that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakEasy. Joe is over at the DeVader. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want, hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, Smasher Pieces, is hosted. And you can find Smasher Pieces and Original Soundchat on podcast services around the globe. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, even on Spotify, where we have a feed with podcast episodes and all that, but we also have a Spotify playlist. If we talk about a video game song on the show and it's on Spotify, it's getting added to that monster playlist. Joe, anything added this week?
Resident Evil 4 is in fact on Spotify. Again, Capcom is at least good at that, even if they're not good at putting their composers' names in the credits. I am still to this day very surprised none of the Banjo soundtracks are on Spotify at all.
Yeah, that is peculiar.
You'd think that'd be something that Microsoft would jump on at some point, but I guess not.
You'd think so. Well, hopefully one for the future if they decide to change their minds there. When you're done listening, you can find us on social media at Soundchat OST. Leave some feedback for us on how we're doing and suggestions for games to cover on the show, because that's one of our big sort of promotions that we want to do in 2021. Get to more of those games. In the meantime, we'll sort out our merch store situation. We'll make some bonus tracks for you. But in the meantime, Joe, who are we talking about next week?
I will be talking about Caleb Bowen.
I will be talking about Clint Mansell. It's finally time to wrap that up with a big game release that week. So excited.
And also, as is my tradition, a game that does not fit tonally with it at all.
It sure doesn't. Oh my gosh. It'll be fun to come up with a theme. We'll have to see. In the meantime, let's play us out. And of course, as Joe mentioned, we talk about a fan remix of a song that we've covered, and it's usually on YouTube. This one comes from PPF, and it's using actual instruments. It was a recent re-recording of, I guess, something that he did with a cover of Spiral Mountain. It sounds so good with these nice live instruments. Just fantastic there by PPF. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.